Hi, and today we're going to talk about factoring quadratics. Now, quadratics are a very, very important part of math, and an especially important part of algebra. And oftentimes you'll be asked to factor them. But how do you do that? And more importantly, what is factoring to begin with? Well, to start off, you might already be familiar with what factoring is, but here we'll give a very specific definition, right? If we have, say, a number like, 8, right? We know if we multiply 1 by 8, we'll get 8. And also if we multiply 2 by 4. We can call these things that we multiply together to get 8 factors. So we can say 1 is a factor of 8. And the same thing goes for 2. 2 is also a factor. And 4 is also a factor. Another way of saying this is saying 8 is divisible. Divisible means it can be divided by 1, 2, and 4. So we can say 8 is divisible by 1, by 2, and by 4. And of course, by 8. Now, what does this mean for quadratics and for polynomials? Well, it means that just like how numbers have factors and numbers are divisible by other numbers, so too are different types of expressions in polynomials. We could say, if we had something like x squared times 6x, we can combine those like terms and we get 6x cubed. So we can say 6x cubed is divisible by x squared in 6x, or 6x cubed has two factors, x squared and 6x. They're both factors of 6x cubed. Now, we can expand this further into what we call quadratics. Now, what are quadratics? Well, quadratic in the original Latin refers to squares. And of course, we're in algebra, we're not dealing with geometry, so where does that square come from? Well, that square means that refers to the fact that for every quadratic you'll ever see, the degree will always be 2. Quadratics always have a degree of 2. So an example of a quadratic would be x squared plus 4x plus 1, where the highest the x power goes is 2. Quadratics will always start with something x squared, whether it be just plain x squared or 6x squared or any other x squared term. And that is what defines a quadratic. And oftentimes you'll be asked to factor a quadratic. And factoring, of course, means finding out what goes in or what is divisible by a given quadratic. So how would we find that? Well, we know that this quadratic is going to be split into 2 parts. It's going to be split into 2 parts, or less than 2 parts, but at least 2 parts with a single x term. All right, so x plus a and x plus b. Now, why is that? That's because when we're going to multiply them together to get our quadratic, we're going to have to multiply one x by another x to get x squared. That's how we know we're going to have at most 2 terms that multiply together to have x squared. If we had, 3 terms, well, then when we multiply them together, we get an x cubed, and we don't have an x cubed here. So at most, we're going to have an x and another x, and that's what we're looking for. So how do we find, these 2 expressions, these 2 parts? How do we find them? Well, we'll start by expanding out this expression. I changed this so it's something easy to work with, right? So we'll make sure we multiply each term by every other term. So x times x is x squared. X times b is bx. X times a is ax. And a times b is ab. So we can simplify that. Since these both have the same degree, they're x raised to the 1 power, we can combine their terms as a plus b times x plus ab. We notice an interesting pattern. Since these two are equal, right? This is the factored form and this is the original. We know that we can actually find a and b. We know that they have to multiply to be -2, right? This term corresponds with this term. So we have -2 equals a times b. But we know that a plus b has to equal -1. Now, here's where things get a little tricky, and we have to be a little creative in the way that we problem solve. We have to find numbers that work for these two, right? Factors of -2, things that multiply to be -2, that when we add them together, we get -1. Now that negative sign means, hey, at least one of the numbers, one of a or b, has to be negative, right? Because I multiply a negative by a positive, I get a negative. It's probably going to be bigger than the other one, because when I add these two together, I get a negative answer. So I'm going to start off with trying, hey, a is -2 and b is 1. And I'm going to test my work. -2 times 1, it is indeed -2. -2 plus 1, hey, that's -1. So that means we do have our two values. So I can rewrite this expression, now that I know all the terms, as x minus 2 times x plus 1. And that is the basis of factoring quadratics. That's how we're going to approach them and how we're going to deal with them. We're going to pretend, if we don't know these values, we're going to say they're a and b. And we're going to look at this term and say, okay, what two numbers do I have to multiply together to get this value? And then, of those values, which of them add to whatever this number is? In this case, it was just a -1. But it can be, hey, this could be, x squared plus 6x plus 4. In which case, I'd say, okay, I want factors of 4 that add to 6. Or I could do something like, all right, I want factors of 8 that add to -2, right? Just part of looking and finding and solving. And if you're having trouble, if it's a particularly big number that you're looking for factors for, I suggest just listing out every single factor and making sure to find your answer there. And sometimes, important thing you notice, sometimes you'll have to deal with negative factors, right? If I had something like x squared minus 4x plus 4, and I'll show you what I mean here, right? So we have something like this, and we have our x plus a and our x plus b right here. And of course, we expand them all out. We know that's equal to this, right? So we know ab equals 4, but a plus b equals -4. Now we notice, hey, when I add these two numbers together, I get a negative answer. When I multiply them together, I get a positive answer. That's pretty weird. That would only work if both of these are negative, right? If I add two negative numbers together, I'll get a negative answer. But if I multiply two negative numbers together, I'll get a positive answer. So I'm really looking for two negative numbers. And I say, okay, that's weird. Let me try listing out the factors. -4 and -1. B equals -1. Well, no, that doesn't work because -4 plus -1 is -5. What about, that leaves me 2 and 2. So maybe A equals -2 and B equals -2. Well, actually, that works. -2 plus -2 is indeed -4. So I have my answer. I have x minus 2 times x minus 2. Since these are actually the same thing, we can just rewrite this as x minus 2 squared. And that is our fully factored answer. that just about sums it up as an introduction to factoring quadratics. Just remember, looking for the product, the factors, and looking for factors of that sum to whatever this is. And that's your process of going around and factoring quadratics. I hope you found this helpful, and I hope you have a great day.